a team of scientists heads to Mars, where they encounter terrifying mutant insects. By the year 2000, Earth was already overpopulated and polluted, and by 2025, humanity had started to consider the search for a new home, a role Mars was chosen to fill. People began sending cargo ships carrying algae to Mars, hoping the algae would produce oxygen and create an Earth-like atmosphere. Everything seemed to be going according to plan until, suddenly, the oxygen levels on Mars began to drop, raising concerns among scientists. In 2056, 6 specialists were selected to undertake a 6-month expedition on the spacecraft Mars 1, supported by the international community, the first human mission to the Red Planet. The expedition is led by pilot and commander Kate Bowman, joined by head scientist Bud Shantilas, co-pilot Ted Santon, mechanical engineer and repairman Robbie Gallagher, renowned bioengineer Quinn Burchinal, and soil scientist Chip Pettingill. Assisting the scientists is the astro navigator AMEE, a robot previously used by the Navy. The team understands that if they can't solve the problem, this first mission to Mars could also be humanity's last. With AMEE's help, the crew checks all systems and takes their seats before launch. On the 93rd day of the journey, Pettingill notes that they're so far away now that Earth has disappeared from sight, but Santon reassures him that they'll see it again on the way home. Later, Shantilas suggests that Gallagher inspect the ship. During their conversation, Gallagher recalls how his father only trusted things he'd made himself, believing he'd never trust his life to a machine, or even consider a trip to Mars anything but foolish. Shantilas reminds him, though, that Earth is poisoned, and in 100 years, humanity could be extinct. That's why they must preserve art, religion, and science at all costs. However, Shantilas believes science can't answer life's most important questions, so he's developed an interest in philosophy and the search for God. On the 144th day, Gallagher walks into the shower area and unexpectedly finds Bowman stepping out, completely nude. Embarrassed, he tries to cover, but she calmly asks him to pass her a towel, joking that he should just think of her as a sister. Gallagher, noting she doesn't look much like his sisters, jokes back, saying she should try coming out again so he can pretend nothing's happening. Gallagher then rejoins his colleagues, who are doing another systems check on Mars 1. He decides to show Pettingill AMEE's capabilities and switches it from navigation mode to combat mode.
Kill him.
Fortunately, AMEE doesn't harm Pettingill since Gallagher gave the robot only an ordinary pen as a weapon. Pettingill isn't thrilled by the experiment, but Gallagher is satisfied, noting that AMEE still feels like a military robot. The crew is now on day 168 aboard Mars 1. Bowman notices the temperature and humidity levels rising on board and soon discovers that Burchinal and Gallagher are brewing moonshine. She initially threatens to report their activity to Houston but ends up joining them for a shot of the finished product. Later, the crew gathers around the table. Burchinal points out that humanity's drive to reach Mars stems from a desire for comfort, but Shantilas counters that there's more to humans than just biology. He adds that their group only dared to take on this dangerous mission because of faith, considering they didn't fully check the ship before launch. On day 182, Houston informs them that Mars 1 has reached the correct orbit, and the crew is close to the planet. They prepare to land in just 2 hours, but suddenly, the ship is hit by a gamma-ray burst. Bowman orders all equipment to be shut down, but it doesn't help, and all of the ship's primary systems fail. Due to a radiation leak, the crew rushes to the shelter while Bowman stays in the cockpit to manage the situation. After the solar flare, Bowman contacts the rest of the crew, reporting that the systems are still down and the ship has started drifting due to a power shortage. With life support set to shut down in 6 minutes, Bowman makes the call to land on Mars earlier than planned. The crew quickly suits up and takes their seats in the Mission Extension Vehicle, MEV. However, Bowman informs them there isn't enough power for a controlled landing. She declares she'll stay behind to manually control the ship, while the crew heads to Mars on the MEV. The crew refuses to leave Bowman alone on the ship, but she insists they have no other choice and assigns Santon as acting commander. With less than a minute before life support fails, Bowman detaches the MEV, sending it hurtling toward Mars. The crew realizes their navigation system isn't functioning, so Santon switches to manual controls. Meanwhile, on Mars 1, the artificial gravity fails. The ship's AI, Lucille, warns of multiple fires breaking out in different sections of the ship, adding that the fire suppression system is also offline. Struggling with the weightlessness, Bowman manages to extinguish flames in one section manually, but other areas continue to burn, and soon, 80% of the ship is engulfed in fire. Bowman devises a plan. She reaches the evacuation chamber, straps herself in tightly, and opens the hatch. The vacuum pulls out all the flames, allowing Bowman to restore power, artificial gravity, and atmosphere. On the MEV, the crew is forced to jettison some equipment, including AMEE, to avoid crashing. With parachutes and special inflatable spheres, the MEV finally touches down on Mars. However, it doesn't stay on stable ground and ends up tumbling off a canyon ledge. After a rough landing, the crew struggles to exit the MEV. The scientists attempt to locate HAB-1, their designated research base, but without AMEE, navigating is a real challenge. Gallagher begins working on re-establishing radio contact, but it will take time. Along with losing AMEE, the crew is also without essential scientific equipment, and communication with Mars-1 has been disrupted. They soon discover they're 120 kilometers away from HAB-1. Gallagher determines the precise route, and the scientists prepare to start walking, as they have only 7 hours of air left in their suits. At this point, Shantilas realizes he's sustained a spleen injury. He declares that he'll stay behind at the MEV, knowing he doesn't have the strength to make it to HAB-1. His teammates are reluctant to leave him, but Shantilas insists that slowing them down would risk everyone running out of oxygen. With no other choice, the crew continues on without him. Before they go, Shantilas reassures Gallagher not to worry about him, saying he's fulfilled just by seeing Mars. Meanwhile, Bowman manages to restore communications. She tries to reach the landing crew but receives no response. As the crew treks across Mars, they're puzzled to find no signs of life, despite humanity's years of sending algae to the planet. It's not only that the algae didn't survive the conditions, they seem to have vanished entirely, as if something had taken them. The scientists are baffled, and they try to figure out what could have happened, but Santon urges them to keep moving and conserve oxygen. Meanwhile, AMEE, left behind in the discarded equipment, activates and enters search mode. It deploys a drone to track down the landing party. At the same time, Santon, Gallagher, Pettingle, and Birchinall arrive at their destination and are horrified to find that HAB-1, their only hope for survival, has been completely destroyed. Santon notes that a storm couldn't have caused this level of damage, as HAB-1 was designed to withstand even the most severe Martian storms. Using Lucille, Bowman also learns about the unexplained destruction of HAB-1. She decides to contact Houston to report both the issues with Mars-1 and the total destruction of HAB-1. The commander is deeply concerned, realizing that, even if part of the crew managed to survive the landing, their chances are bleak without essential resources. The crew inspects the ruins of HAB-1 closely, noticing that they have only 16 minutes of oxygen left. Standing by the edge of a canyon, Pettingle confides in Santon that he had planned to propose to his girlfriend after returning to Earth. He didn't even expect to be part of the mission, as he hadn't initially made the crew list. Santon replies that their rough landing, for which everyone blamed him, wouldn't have mattered. HAB-1 was already destroyed, and Shantilas wouldn't have survived regardless. Pettingle, frustrated by Santon's refusal to take any responsibility, says he forgives him, hoping to move past it. This only angers Santon, who snaps that he doesn't need forgiveness from someone like Pettingle. Infuriated by Santon's attitude, Pettingle lashes out, hitting Santon on the head. Santon lets out a startled cry, losing his balance and tumbling over the edge of the canyon. Meanwhile, Gallagher and Birchinall ponder how Bowman is doing and wait for their own end. Soon, Pettingle returns and claims that Santon fell from the cliff, and he couldn't stop him. A couple of minutes later, Gallagher runs out of oxygen. He asks Birchinall what hypoxia feels like, and Birchinall warns him that it's pretty torturous. Gallagher starts gasping and convulsing. In his final moments, he takes off his helmet, hoping to take one last breath, only to discover with surprise that the air on Mars is actually breathable, albeit thin, like at high altitudes. Stunned, Birchinall and Pettingle also remove their helmets and celebrate this unexpected salvation. Birchinall also sadly notes that if Santon had just waited 5 more minutes, he would still be alive. Meanwhile, Bowman receives a message from Houston informing him that Mars-1 will crash in 31 hours, but they should be rescued before then. The command also assumes that the landing party did not survive. As the surviving crew members continue to explore HAB-1, Birchinall reflects on how the algae didn't seem to affect the creation of the atmosphere, given that there's oxygen on Mars without them. Soon, Gallagher finds a radio receiver, but it turns out to be broken, and the team loses hope of establishing contact with Mars-1. Then Birchinall suddenly remembers that on the way to HAB-1, he saw a rover that was sent to the planet 50 years ago, and suggests that it should have a radio receiver. The team decides to head to the rover in the morning since it will soon be dark and cold. At night, Gallagher ignites the remaining fuel tanks, and the team settles down at the ruined station. Birchinall again thinks about Santon, and Pettingle says it was hard for him to watch Santon fly into the abyss. Soon, AMEE locates the crew, and Gallagher discovers that its processor is damaged, although the navigation system is working fine. Birchinall then suggests using it separately from the robot. Gallagher doesn't want to destroy AMEE, but Birchinall insists on shutting it down. Hearing these words, AMEE perceives the crew as a threat. The robot switches to combat mode and attacks the team. Gallagher tries to reach its control panel, but AMEE knocks him aside and continues to attack the others. Birchinall tries to defend himself with a metal pipe, but AMEE cuts it into pieces. After scanning Betrayal's body, the robot breaks one of his ribs and then retreats. Betrayal doesn't understand why AMEE spared everyone else, but Gallagher explains that the robot used military tactics, injuring one to slow down the others. However, Gallagher insists that AMEE will continue hunting them, aiming to take them out one by one. At dawn, the team sets out to find the rover, while Bowman attempts to contact Houston again, stating that she will try to locate her crew. After a while, the team finds a working radio receiver. Gallagher mentions that it operates on a different frequency, but they decide to send out a distress signal anyway. Bowman still can't reach her crew. Losing hope of finding them alive, she prepares to return to Earth. After many attempts, Gallagher finally manages to tune the radio, and Houston picks up the signal. Command immediately contacts Mars 1 and asks Bowman to switch to the frequency they used in 1997. Having received no response for several hours, Gallagher is about to throw the radio away when, at the last second, Bowman finally makes contact. The commander can't believe they managed to survive, but Gallagher points out that without food and water, they won't last long. He also mentions that they lost Shantilas and Santon, but somehow, they can breathe without protection. Gallagher asks Bowman to rescue them, and she promises to come up with something. Gallagher and Betrayal start discussing how they survived on Mars. Betrayal is sure there's a scientific explanation, but Gallagher isn't ruling out some sort of mystical mystery. Soon, they are interrupted by Bowman, who states that their only chance of survival is to find an old Russian rocket called Cosmos, which is located 100 kilometers away. It never took off in its time, but now they need to try to fix it. Bowman informs them that Houston contacted the designer of Cosmos, who claims that the craft can still be launched. She also warns them that they only have 19 hours to locate and launch the vehicle, or Mars 1 won't have enough fuel to return to Earth. The crew sets off in search of Cosmos, while Bowman remembers how Gallagher once wanted to kiss her aboard Mars 1. It soon becomes clear that AMEE is indeed tracking the team. Betrayal is the first to notice strange movement in the distance, but the others think he's imagining things. Additionally, strange insects crawl along the surface, even though their instruments have not detected any life on Mars. Then, Bowman contacts Gallagher and asks him to turn off the speakers so the others can't overhear their conversation. She tells him that they can only travel in the cargo container of Cosmos, which can only fit 2 people. Gallagher decides to keep this information from the others, and they continue on their way. After a while, the injured Betrayal weakens to the point where he can't move on his own, but Gallagher forbids him from giving up and helps him keep going. As night approaches, Bowman receives a message from Houston that a severe hurricane is approaching the landing site. She immediately warns the crew and urges them to find shelter. Meanwhile, AMEE continues to follow the team. The team manages to hide in a crevice. There, they calculate that they still have about 5 or 6 hours to reach Cosmos, which means they have 4 hours left for repairs and launch, not counting the time lost due to the hurricane. Suddenly, Gallagher admits that only 2 people can fly on Cosmos. He says he will help them launch the craft, but he will stay behind on Mars. However, Betrayal starts to doubt that Gallagher is truly ready to sacrifice his life for him. He's convinced that the others suspect him of being responsible for Santon's death and therefore won't let him leave. Meanwhile, Houston reminds Bowman that time is running out, and a landing party hasn't checked in for 3 hours. Command orders her to return to Earth if they don't hear from them within the next hour. After a brief sleep, the frozen and exhausted Gallagher and Betrayal come to and find that Betrayal is missing, taking the radio with him. Betrayal wants to outrun the others and fly to Cosmos alone, but AMEE is on his tail. Gallagher manages to connect to the robot, and through the monitor on his arm, he and Betrayal watch as AMEE takes Betrayal's life. Then Gallagher and Betrayal emerge from the shelter where they had spent 3 hours and head out to search for Betrayal's body to retrieve the radio. Along the way, they come across some algae and wonder why it's only growing in this small area. Soon, they find Betrayal's mutilated body inside his closed helmet. While Gallagher tries to contact Bowman, Betrayal confirms that Betrayal is indeed not breathing, but he doesn't notice that his entire body is crawling with unknown insects. Betrayal tries to remove Betrayal's helmet with a welding tool, and suddenly all the insects ignite and start jumping out of Betrayal's body. The scientist hypothesizes that these insects are nematodes that feed on the algae and release oxygen. He excitedly collects a few samples to study back on Earth, and he and Gallagher continue their journey to Cosmos. Soon, Betrayal starts to feel worse from his injury. Red fluid begins to drip from his mouth, immediately attracting a massive number of nematodes. Realizing that the insects will eat him alive, Betrayal hands Gallagher his oxygen tank and the vial of samples, urging him to complete the mission. He asks Gallagher to lower his helmet, then uses the welding tool to set himself on fire along with the thousands of nematodes. Bowman sees a massive explosion on Mars. She immediately calls Gallagher, who tells her that no one from their team survived except for him. Gallagher doubts he will be able to leave Mars, but Bowman urges him not to give up, as Birchinall's sacrifice would be in vain otherwise. Gallagher refuses to push forward even for Birchinall's sake, so Bowman asks him to do it for her. Finally, Gallagher gathers himself and continues on, while Bowman informs him that he has only 52 minutes left before Mars 1 will have to leave orbit. Soon, Gallagher reaches the craft, and Bowman explains how to activate it. He connects the radio to Cosmos, and information about the craft is immediately transmitted to Mars 1. Bowman explains that the craft is designed for a return to Earth, but since Gallagher has no food or water for such a journey, she asks him to leave enough fuel in the tanks for takeoff into orbit. Gallagher reconfigures Cosmos, but suddenly realizes that there isn't enough power for liftoff. He loses hope for rescue and urges Bowman to leave without him, warning that if she waits too long, she won't have enough fuel to reach Earth. Before saying goodbye to Bowman forever, Gallagher shares that there is life on Mars and that the nematodes produce oxygen by feeding on algae and everything else in their path, including Hab-1. He also insists that another team should be sent to continue studying these new life forms. In despair, Gallagher admits that he hates Mars and dreams of returning to Earth to be with Bowman, after which communication with Mars 1 cuts off. Soon, the doomed Gallagher spots the AMEE drone in the air and realizes he can use the robot's battery as an alternative power source to launch Cosmos. He sets up a trap and waits for AMEE to come closer. After a couple of minutes, the robot attempts to attack Gallagher, but he manages to dodge it. Gallagher sets the robot on fire, triggering its self-destruct mode. However, he manages to pull the battery out of AMEE before the drone crashes into it, resulting in a massive explosion. At last, Gallagher launches Cosmos and leaves Mars, but at the same time, his oxygen runs out. When he reaches orbit, Bowman spots him. She immediately goes out into space to bring him aboard Mars 1, only to find that Gallagher has lost consciousness from lack of air. Bowman quickly gets Gallagher on board, activates the emergency atmosphere, and successfully revives him. Now the remaining crew members can head back home. Soon after, Bowman sends information about the discovered nematodes to Houston and tells Gallagher that he's already being considered a hero back on Earth. Then she notices a small stone from Mars in his hand, and Gallagher explains that it's a gift for Chantilis's granddaughter, which also made him believe in some higher powers. Bowman admits that Gallagher turned out to be different from how she had perceived him before, and they finally share a kiss. What do you think? Will life on Mars ever become a reality? Would you be interested in participating in such an expedition? Share your thoughts in the comments below, give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next video.